Siri leverages machine learning techniques, deep neural networks, convolutional neural networks, long short-term memory units, gated recurrent units, n-grams, whatever that means. It still sucks and doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
I've never once had it do anything I wanted it to do, so.
A bunch of made-up bullshit.
They don't know what I know.
Welcome back to another Zengineering podcast. I'm Adam.
I'm Brian.
So, first thing I think we got to do is welcome the new. We have made middling attempts to track analytics where we can and see that, how we're doing as a podcast. And we're seeing growth, which is cool. That means there's new people checking us out. So welcome to all the new peeps, and especially the ones helping us out on Patreon. If you're interested in throwing us just like a single buck, we're on a platform called Patreon, which will explain itself to you if you go to patreon.com.
We have an episode about what it is.
And we will explain it to you if you listen to our episode, I think 22. It's called On Patreon.
And other...
But it's a killer way to help us out. And I am now putting the part where I talk about it at the beginning, because I don't trust you to stick around till the end. But if you sign up there even for $1, you also get into our Facebook. We have a secret Facebook group where we have considerably less restrained conversations about things.
We do?
We do. I keep tagging you.
I mean that shit.
Okay, I have considerably less restrained conversations with people.
I chat on Facebook all the time with you and some of our friends who are listeners, I think. No?
So this is our first one in a little while. That's just us. I feel like we've been killing the guest game, but then I'm also kind of just like, man, I want to just talk to Brian about some shit. So here it is.
Yeah, we got lots of guest episodes lined up at the moment. There's lots happening.
How's shit, man? How you been? Planning a wedding? How's that treating you?
I think we've done the hardest part already, which was negotiating the guest list. That was just awkward and uncomfortable, and I didn't enjoy it.
It's tough, man. There's so much weird politics. I'd never take it personally when I'm not invited to a wedding.
Yeah, I certainly, I don't think I do either, but I certainly won't from here on out.
Our answer was to invite almost no one.
I think your answer was great. We almost did that too. I'm saddened, but also like emboldened and happy and excited for people who are just like, fuck this, I'm just going to go sign some papers and be married.
Yeah, it's very like you were there. You were my best man. We did. It was a very minimal ceremony, but it really was the product of having the whole process be like, okay, as soon as we're bummed out by a stressful decision, we're just going to not do that thing. I think it worked pretty well, which is funny because I feel like that attitude kicks back on what I was just talking about with our middling analytics stuff. It's like we put in just enough work on promotion and analytics that we're like, okay, this stopped being fun. That's our threshold.
That's been a good approach to the pod. I think that's the sole reason that this has been our most successful artistic project together, because as soon as one of us doesn't want to do something, we're like, no, fuck you, man. I'm not going to do that.
So much other shit to deal with. I can't. I'm tired. This is not. Yeah.
I really like just talking at you. So that's what I got to stick with. Ooh, the back pain.
Okay, so this week we're going deep. We're going so deep that we're probably going to have to split this into like a 3-parter.
A 3-part series. The first
of
3 parts.
The topic is broadly artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like we've continued to avoid it because it, like, the place we kept ending up with the first season of like, everything's connected, dude. Like it's a part of the next step that makes that conversation so philosophically mind-blowingly difficult to have that that every time we talk about it, it affects, like, we have a document where we keep our mission statement for the Zengineering podcast. And every time we talk about AI, that document gets altered.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's a metaphor for the whole, like, that's what's coming. Like, you can't consider all of the possibilities that fit under the heading of AI without like, how do you adapt your life to get ready for it, or to cope with it, or to coexist with it?
Well, this is this is such a prolific topic because of the time period for our species, like our society, our technology right now. Like 100 years ago, artificial intelligence and like robots and computers, they were just fantasy, right? We were like deep in the Industrial Revolution, and computers, what are these things? 25 years ago, it was like science fiction. It was everything.
Right.
It was Star Trek. It was Star Wars. Everyone's like, these are some really neat ideas. Like, look at these cool spaceships and like a fucking thing that looks like a moon that shoots a laser beam and blows up a planet.
And like 25 before that, it was the oven of the future will prepare your pizza for you. You know, like,
but like today, it's game over, man. Cars are driving themselves. Computers are figuring out everything for us. We talk to like one of 15 devices in our house and it does things for us. Like, we are on that path, and it's happening. Terminators are flying around.
right.
You know? So
I think the way we break this up is to kind of chase that timeline so that we can end with Terminators. Partially because I just want to keep teasing Terminators.
we're
instead
teasing
of
it
just
until
talking about it.
Arnold has a break in his schedule. He's tried to team up with us a bunch of times, but he keeps having things pop up. I don't.
I've been tweeting at him. So I think the first place to start is it's like stereotypical for me at this point, but it's like I want to back it up to like cave paintings, right? Like, you get to this really complicated place, and so you sort of have to back the whole thing all the way up to like how did we get to where we are now, so that then we can talk about what's happening now, and then we can talk about Terminators.
We can start there, but I think this arguably goes back to like the beginning of time. So I like that because it keeps it in this realm of like, we're humans and we're thinking about intelligence and relative to ourselves. So that's okay. We'll start with cavemen and women, cave women too.
Cave people.
Oh, thank you, cave people.
Cave people. Well, so does that go too far? Do we need to start from more of a thing of like, what do you okay, so I think the first thing to start for people's cognitive bias, right, which incidentally we're going to do a whole separate episode on later.
Oh,
like
teaser.
So if you step out of your understanding of how Siri works as an engineer, what do you think of when you think of artificial intelligence, of AI?
I mean, my head goes a lot of places, but I think the obvious place that is one of those that I think is a lot of people is I picture like the robots from movies that look like humans and can talk to you, but you know they're a robot because they have like a robot body. Like, that's the place that I think that's
so like Data.
Yeah, Data.
Like Harrison Ford and Blade Runner. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people think of, and that's one of the places my head goes, like a person thing that talks to me.
Well, and so then I think from there you got to go, okay, well, that's part 3, right? Like, part 3 is we've caught up to the capacity to do things that humans do, and what's after it?
I think the error in that thought, my thought when I think of like robots that can talk to me and hang out and like impersonate humans, like pass the Turing test, the error there is that's a very specific type of artificial intelligence. That is like a fake human. That is an artificial human. That's artificial human intelligence, which is that's like the future of computing, kind of. It's like something that doesn't really exist. It's not really a thing. It's way more complicated.
Well, it's way more complicated because it's like this idea that like, oh, I have a brain and it does things, right? It's like linear and incorrect. Like, your whole body, including your brain, is just a collection of all of these different super complicated processes that are happening on an ongoing basis, and they're going all sorts of different directions and doing all kinds of different stuff. And so I think what tracks us up to getting to replicate that, like you were just saying, like in such a level that it's like data from Star Trek, like the history of AI, the story of how we get up to where we are now is the story of figuring out pieces of that process incrementally and building a machine that's really good at the piece of that process, right? Like a calculator, right? Back it up to calculators, right? Like you wouldn't think of a calculator as artificial intelligence, but it is. Like it knows how to do a thing that otherwise you don't really do unless you have a brain.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that we looked up before this like the actual definition of artificial intelligence like in the dictionary or something, but it's a pretty disputed topic and it's also like widely open for interpretation, right? So I think the place we should go here with this a little bit as because we want to do kind of like what is the history here? What is this? What is this thing and kind of where are we now? There's this long history of beings and creatures.
Also, what the fuck is intelligence? Like, what do we even? I mean, I feel like we have to try to have the conversation, and the listeners should try to think about this without even like. Let's not say artificial intelligence anymore, because what is it?
That's a great way to do this.
What's artificial? What's intelligence? Like, I think by treading on those concepts is how we end up off the cliff of philosophical conversation.
That's a great point.
To a place that's
the
like,
name in and of itself has two like impossibly complex philosophical terms used to describe it, which I think is an important aspect of the thing itself. Like the concept of artificial intelligence is very complicated. It is like at the core of all the big questions in the universe. Who are we? Where did we come from? What are we doing here? How do we know that we're here?
But so let's back it up. So calculators.
I thought we were going to cavemen.
You would call calculator. Well, a calculator is.
Calculator's a good one to go to right
it's
now.
It's easy to get your head around as, oh yeah, that's intelligence, right? But how much further would you back it up?
Well, let's talk about a calculator just for a second before we go further back. It's the part of me that wants to say a calculator is artificial intelligence is because we're like offloading something to it, something that's complicated and hard that like doesn't necessarily
otherwise
get done.
Cognitive process is being
and something that like it's not like dogs are writing down math equations and doing calculus. Like you can definitely argue that math is being done in nature it certainly is being done in nature, but not in the same way, like this purposeful, like, hey, I choose to do some addition right now. Right. So we're like offloading that task. It does it faster than us. It does it more efficiently. It does a lot of math that I can't do, that kind of thing. Like you can like abstract difficult math and have it do parts of it. So like it's absolutely artificial intelligence. It stores variables for you, that kind of thing. So that's an easy one. Okay. Let's go further back.
So then would you call an abacus artificial intelligence?
Definitely.
Or
Definitely.
just a tool for, I mean, I guess it would be artificial. This relates to last week's conversation with Alan, right? Because it's intelligent in the sense that it has organized a tool of notation for you in such a way that you can much more quickly count things.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I like this game, by the way. This is a good bit to like go backwards.
Yeah.
I said absolutely right away because I was like, oh, it's just a calculator. But it's a little different. You have to make it do the thing.
Right. So
whereas a calculator, you like put some variables in and hit enter, but then it does a bunch of steps itself.
You instigate an action, it does all the steps, right? An abacus, you have to instigate every single action.
But it still does some steps because of its structure.
Right. So I would argue that you're still offloading some intelligence because you're not having to teach every single person you sit down to teach a certain way to count quickly. You're not having to teach them. And if you stack it up this way and then this way and then this way and then this way, you can just flick the beans and then you count much faster, right? They're offloading that into a thing where you're just like, plunk, learn how to use this. You'll save some time.
I don't really know how an abacus works. I can kind of picture sort of what one looks like, but I think abacus is just for counting.
But yeah, I think so. Slide rule is something different, but I completely don't understand it. So
I have my mom's slide rule.
I don't understand.
Well, for all intents and purposes, I think structurally, if one's artificial intelligence, the other one is. So I guess what we're doing with those is we're offloading a construct, like a mental construct, to accomplish something, to do something. We're an idea, and we're physically building it into something. I think it's easier to look at a calculator and say it's artificial intelligence because it's more like your smartphone. It is a computer in the modern sense. It feels kind of mystical. It's doing things at like a really low, like subatomic level. But I think an abacus is the same as a calculator.
Well, so it feels like this is where it overlaps with like the idea of design thinking, right? Like you are putting consideration into the device in front of you for a purpose, right? And that means that you're taking that consideration and you're embodying it in such a way that you can put it in front of other people without you having to be there and go, yo, this is if you do this and then this and then this and then this. So back it up to this. Fingers, counting on your fingers.
So this is an interesting one. I really like this process. So counting on your
floating another process.
Well, counting on your fingers starts to take you to a really weird place because you're right. It all of a sudden you've got the concept of the abacus. You've just like moved it to your hands, kind of like the mechanism of it. But your fingers are also part of your body. But also at the same point, like, are they?
Well, that I was going to say, like, the thing I want to say that's like we have to back away from right away because we're towing the edge of the abyss.
Let's not go into the abyss quite yet, but
counting fingers. This relates to something you said last week too, which is like, is 10 an optimized number of digits or just completely a fluke?
Right.
So is that intelligence? Is that some inherited universal intelligence? Or just a complete fluke that has crafted the way that we deal with math as a representation of the universe?
Those are three really great examples to go to, like the modern calculator, the abacus, and then your fingers. I used to count on my fingers inside my desk, like in the little cubby hole in my desk in like third grade, because you were told not to count on your fingers, which I kind of get that argument, but also kind of go fuck yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's like when they used to tell us not to calculators, right?
You won't always have a calculator within arm's reach in 17 directions.
Right. That's what they always said. I literally have 1, 2,
I have
3,
4 at least.
4. I have at least 6 calculators within 4 steps of me right now. It's a funny argument though, right? Like they're
not
trying
literal
to teach
calculators.
you. They're trying to teach you, right?
Well, one
I'm
of
talking
them is
about some phones and a watch and But I was going to say the crazy thing about that is those calculators are like. What I could use my phone to solve is literally everything they teach you in the entirety of a math doctoral degree. Like, you could study math for your whole life to be the most advanced at math ever. And the ability of your phone to do that, like, it's you could run Mathematica on your phone, is what I'm saying. Like, it's not just a calculator. It's a math engine.
Computers are just math engines. Math is another interesting piece of this that we'll probably get to more. So it's good that we got to that right away, kind of by accident in the beginning, because math is behind all of this, right?
So a step past calculators, you've got, I feel like computers.
I think things subtly shift. It's not like it's black and white exactly, which I think is also a point that you bring up a lot. A place I go to do math, I would say probably more so than anywhere else these days, is I just type math questions or math equations into Google and hit enter, and it does math for me. I convert units all the time there. I go from like ounces to pounds and stuff when I'm cooking or measuring things. I do simple math equations in there. What's 400 divided by 7, right? It'll give you those answers. It'll convert units like pounds to kilograms, and it'll do equations. And the difference there from something that we just mentioned a second ago is it will kind of talk back to me. It will interpret. If I write OZ versus OUNCES, it will interpret. It knows. I don't know really on the back end if Google's search algorithm is actually someone just programmed OZ equals OUNCES, ounces equals ounces, but it'll autocorrect. It'll auto-suggest. It'll give not only a math equation, the answer to the math equation, but also articles about it. Like there's something a little different there than my calculator, you know?
And that certainly feels smarter. But I would argue that it's still no different from a calculator. All you described is a different input mechanism.
Right.
Like on a calculator, same as an abacus, you can only use the beans you can flick. On a calculator, you can only execute the limited subset of math commands provided to you by the keyboard in front of you.
Right.
What you just described is a place where you just go to the box and you say, do this thing, right? Because one step past that is Siri, and you can just ask Siri to do math. You can just speak your request to Siri.
That's a good next one.
The input mechanism has changed in that you just type out the thought in your brain of what you're seeking.
Mm-hmm.
It interprets that it's math, and it does the calculations for you. So why does that seem smarter? Just because it's more complicated?
You said an interesting thing there. It interprets that it was math. My calculator only takes math. I can't search my calculator to also find like articles on rock climbing in San Diego. So Google has to also make a decision and say, the things you just typed into my little box on the screen, I think this is a math equation. Let me solve it for you. And so that's a piece of it.
But so what you're talking about is, I mean, there's two things there when you're talking about Google, which is one, it learned or it became smarter in the sense that it can take your sort of vague, nebulous input and interpret what it means. And then it can do the math problem contained therein.
You know, there's an interesting YouTube video sensation called like if Google was a person, something like that. Is that what it's called? Do you know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. It's like there are like 5 or 6 of them. They're hysterical to watch. It's just this like normal looking office worker dude guy sitting at a desk, and the sign on the door says like Google, right? And people come into his office and ask him for things, and it really demonstrates how bizarre and how like impressive it is that a search engine can respond to stuff, because you get a lot of questions. People come in and ask like weird things, and that person behind the desk has to interpret what you were just asking. What are they looking for? What should I give them based on the vague question they posed or the vague terms they put into the search box? So,
well, what I think is interesting is that still contains a calculator, right? So if you're chasing down the rabbit hole of doing math, like we've conquered math to the point, this is the point I was making about your phone. Like we've conquered math as a problem that's tough to offload because you got to learn how to do it.
Yeah.
To the point that we're like, math is boring. Let's start fixing how people tell the device to do that math, because it's like you don't have to do integrals anymore, but you do still have to know how to tell a TI-8092. That's the one that does integrals, right?
I think my 89 does integrals.
Yeah,
who knows? I don't really know anything about integrals.
Does. Anyway,
I should.
Calculus.
So
you still need to know how to ask it to do calculus, and that takes some learning.
Yeah.
Now you can just shout an integral at it, and it'll solve it for you.
Can you?
Probably.
I've never tried to do complex math with my phone. Let's try it right now.
Siri is hooked up to Wolfram Alpha, which is Mathematica, so I assume
let's try this real quick and see what happens, and see if we can get it on tape. Siri, integrate x over 2.
Let me check on that. All right, here's what I got.
Say it. It did. It pulled up calculations and charts and graphs. That didn't feel... You know what was interesting? The fact that she didn't say the answer to me made me feel like she was less intelligent. My brain went to, oh, she just pulled this from a website, which it actually looks like Mathematica. It is. It's Wolfram Alpha. You can the logos at the bottom.
Mathematica for sure.
And like she just did it, right? I asked her a math question, integrate x over 2, and the equation's on here, the answer's on here, a 3D plot's on here, a contour plot. But it doesn't feel like she did it to me.
Because without the ability, this is why they say if you really want to learn a topic, teach it.
Right.
Because there's no understanding from Siri. Understanding is an interesting word. And the second I said it I was like, fuck, bad word.
No, it's go with it though.
She can't say back to you what the answer is. She doesn't actually know what an integral is. She just recognized the request, ran it through Mathematica, which is Wolfram Alpha's like mathematics engine, and then showed what Mathematica spit back. But she can't articulate the answer to the question like a person could.
Siri, what is an integral?
Here is what I found.
Read it.
You can tell her.
She pulled
to
up
read
a
me.
satellite whose like acronym is integral. Well, that brings up an interesting thing here, I guess, right? Like what I would have a hard time arguing that she didn't just do an integral, right? I asked her the question, she pulled up the answer. Like as far as anyone's concerned, she just got 100 on the test, right?
Right. So once it can interpret you speaking, it can now do a thing that was otherwise reserved for mostly humans or animals that understand commands. So now, like, we're towing this line, I think, in terms of what we would consider to be, like, I don't want to call it artificial intelligence. I want to say the smartest of the devices we have available to us now, which I think arguably would be Google, is closer and closer to seeming to be able to do things that were otherwise reserved for humans. Understanding what some poorly spoken doofus said to you and being able to answer the question is just a really hard thing to do. Like, you have to listen, you have to fill in all kinds of blanks, you have to then fill in cognitive blanks, you then have to process to find the answer. And so it seems to be doing a really complicated thing.
It's also an interesting thing because our calculators, this is a subtle point, but I think it's important. Our calculators have like right and wrong answers. If you type in 2 + 2 and your calculator says 5, it's broken. It didn't calculate right. It's not a calculator, right? Google is doing interpretation on things that don't have right answers. Like when I pose a question, a lot of people type questions into Google. They'll say like, what's the healthiest fruit to eat, right? That's not really an answerable question. And I don't mean that in the normal sense where we argue about like health and nutrition, but like it's abstract. It doesn't know your intention. The only truth is internal there. Like you kind of knew your intention and your words were an abstraction of the concept you're trying to figure out. And Google has to guess at like this other creature's intention behind something that it typed in, which is very, very different than 2 + 2 and hitting equal. It's a different type of problem.
And so following up from the calculator, like what Siri is doing when you ask about that fractal that feels smart is that you were able to just say, or not fractal, the integral. When you just asked it to integrate whatever, and then it gave you an answer, it is able to do the human-like thing of interpreting your speech and your meaning and the intent of your question.
The thing about Siri, from if you look at this from an actual like computer science perspective, the amazing thing about what we just did with Siri is not really that she looked up how well. One that I'm referring to as a she is weird. There's like this, we've got these layers of interesting things happening, right? There's a voice on it. But the really hard, it feels weird to say it. The really impressive thing that she did is interpret Siri integrate x over 2 and can differentiate that from blah, 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 blah. Like she's understanding speech,
right,
which takes decades for humans to do.
And the reason that makes this whole conversation suddenly like squirrely is because that's you're right. You have to get to a certain age before you can even do that. It takes years of development of the human computer before we even have the capacity to understand speech on that level of complexity, right? And so that makes her appear to be smart. But what I'm chasing with this is she's still just essentially running a decision tree. Right? Like there's still just a program in a box somewhere that is Siri. And if you spit in any number of complex inputs, these things will come out the other side.
Well, I'm seeing where I think we're both going here a little bit by accident. And I agree with you. Like Siri is the first thing we've talked about here on this list that I think if you look up like if you look up an article like what is artificial intelligence, where is it in your life, people are going to bring up Siri. Siri's a hot one. Your smartphone,
Alexa.
There's a lot of stuff like that. Alexa.
Let's see how many things we can say to set off people's smart devices.
Alexa, Alexa,
Home. Okay,
order me a
Google.
pizza. Alexa, set an alarm for 4:30 a.m. in the morning. That was rude, and we shouldn't have been doing it.
Play Big Booty Hoes.
The series she's still not like doing things on her own. We're still making her do things. Siri's not waking up in the middle of the night and say, "Hey man, do you want to know what the integral of x over 2 is? I was just thinking about it."
Well, and that seems to go to what we're starting to say and then backed away from, which was she doesn't understand what you're asking. Like she doesn't go, "Oh, that's an integral. It's associated with all these other things that I learned about in math class. And so here's the thing that I have to do." Like there's not an awareness of solving an integral. It's just, oh, I got the integral tag. I run this decision tree. I spit out this answer on the other side. If you asked her to explain what an integral is to you, she'd send you to Wikipedia.
She does kind of know those things, though. There's Siri's doing more than
that's what I think is
tree.
fascinating. Because what's knowledge?
And so she does know those things are associated. When she searches, when her computer, I mean, Siri's running on computers, right? Like just to be, because that probably is abstract to people sometimes when they interact with her. Like she's probably running on lots of computers. It's a difficult process. It's very complex software. It's lots of black box stuff, but she's essentially running on a computer. She's running on the same things your calculator runs on, the same things your cell phone runs on. And she kind of does have that knowledge, though. Like to get to that result, to have pulled up Wolfram Alpha, she had to have had context for what I just said. Not only did she have to have context for like the sound of my voice and identifying words, which is the part you kind of gloss over, but there's context for that topic. Like she looked stuff up, and in like databases, in neural networks, and however she's running, like there's context for everything. And so she does have that context. Maybe she just hasn't learned to speak yet. Children know things before they can say words because you can sign with them.
Right. Well,
so
it's funny that you said know things, though, right? So is knowledge is part of intelligence, but it's not. Earlier you were saying, can you have intelligence without memory?
Yeah.
Right? So knowledge is essentially just the like collected, synthesized information stored in memory, right? I mean, if you say someone is knowledgeable, you just mean they know a lot of shit. It just means they have put on their hard drive a whole bunch of extra stuff, processes, facts, whatever.
A modern computer, this is an interesting question.
Like, does Google know the answers to things? It certainly gets you to them.
You could definitely argue that, I think you could argue that any storage of information, like a database or an Excel spreadsheet or a book, it knows this stuff. It just doesn't know how to communicate it. Or maybe it doesn't, there are layers to it. It doesn't necessarily know how to think about it, or it doesn't know how to synthesize something new, but a book knows stuff. The dictionary, you could argue that the dictionary knows the definition of words. Like this book knows it. It's in there. It is the book, and the book has that information. It can't speak. It can't talk to me about it.
The part that I'm trying to get you ready for, and that's going to sustain my excitement through the entirety of the remaining parts of this series on artificial intelligence, is trying to wrap your head, like, to make peace with the future that is coming within the next 20 to 50 years. You have to think about this stuff. The people that I talk to about my philosophy degree that are like, that say things to me like, "Oh, I couldn't handle that." Like what they mean is that stuff is so far out there to conceptualize and know how to deal with and know what to do with your life, like the morning after you talk about it, that they were like, I just don't enjoy it. I love that shit. But like artificial intelligence is about to force us to start to have to grapple with things like, what does it mean to have knowledge? Like, because Google already knows more than anyone will ever know. So do we still should we still push people to have knowledge?
Mhm.
Because like what good is it that I know a bunch of random ass facts? Is that a waste of my brain computer, which is still wildly more powerful than Google?
You could definitely argue that it's less valuable than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, if you knew tons of facts, you were really great at trivia. You were great to have around if I had a question about a topic you were knowledgeable on. Now, I don't care anymore.
Paid to put those facts in other people
In
for
fact,
a living?
we're to the point where if I have my phone and you tell me a fact, I automatically say, quiet for a second, let me look up the fact you just told me to make sure that it was right. I'm a jackass too, and I know that, but knowing the facts is only... So this is an interesting like crutch for us to try to figure out the next step here with this conversation is knowing the fact. There's a stark separation between conceptualizing something, creating something, having an idea, having a conversation around it, and knowing the fact, right? I still go, before I want to have a conversation about a topic that we're doing a podcast on, I go like look up facts. I also look up other people's ideas. And so I'm loading up with something. I'm loading up my memory with things that allow me to then do something else on top of them, that allow me to like come up with new ideas.
Right. Well, so it's synthesis, right? Like you're taking in these other ideas and these other understandings. But so then that's that idea of knowledge versus understanding, right? Because I think one of the funny things that this podcast has been, I think more so for you than me, an exercise in is dropping the fact that knowledge is important versus understanding, right? You can't rattle off the facts about how a quantum computer works, but you understand what it's doing and what it means for the world. But the fact that you can't, but we grew up in a time and an education system where actually being able to spit back those stats was how you got a good grade.
I feel like
you feel bad when you can't do it, even though what I'm sitting here going is saying, it doesn't matter. What does it mean? If
We
you're
grew up-
feeling bad.
I think
why?
we grew up
What a
at a
waste.
time too when the people teaching us were still from a world where you could know everything. I guess I don't mean everything, but like if you took a topic 50 years ago, which is like when our teachers were kids, you could still like know everything in an area and understand everything. And like you could read books and be an expert. Like if you look back at, I don't remember this article explicitly, but it was talking about like Thomas Jefferson or something or Benjamin Franklin. It was like, for all intents and purposes, that person knew everything at the time. Like maybe not every abstract idea, but every fact that we knew.
Well, it gets us back,
just
I
know.
think, to it's the same old Zengineering, fucking stereotype. But like it's a problem of connectivity. Like
Yeah, you can't know anything anymore.
So little at the time that you could know everything within the sphere of their connectivity.
Right.
Like you could know it and you could teach it to other people. And we grew up at a time where like when we were in grade school through high school and even college, I'd say, you could still know everything there was to know. You had to read 50 textbooks, but that's what PhDs do. They read all 50 textbooks and then they write another textbook. And if your textbook is good enough, you get to call yourself a doctor of that thing.
That would be a really interesting analysis to look at the change in like specificity or the granularity of knowledge as doctoral theses. Yeah, that'd be a really interesting. I don't know how you'd analyze that. Maybe like length of titles, complexity of words, number of syllables in title. Like, right. But there's this. I'm certain if that were an analysis we could do right now, that you would see this amazing stratification of the topic of knowledge, and that's really what theses are, right? It's knowledge going down.
Well, it's sort of what you were saying, right? About, well, you can, and this is back to that understanding versus knowledge thing. Like to write a thesis, it's supposed to be a new idea, which means you had to consume a certain amount of knowledge about your subject, internalize it, understand it, and use it to synthesize a new idea. Which takes a lot of time and it's super complicated.
And right now seems like it still requires a human.
But what's interesting is that sphere in which you can, so like the fact that you go to granularity, right, is what you want to chase when you say study granularity, is you want to take a look at, are people's theses getting more specific because you just can't know everything about genetics anymore. So instead you chase a single gene where you can spend your whole life getting all the knowledge you can about just that gene so that you can synthesize a theory about blah, blah, blah related to just that gene. But like, you have to let some of the broader stuff fall away that used to be required for a genetics thesis, because you just can't hold it all in your sphere of knowledge. But like, it still relates to that same thing, right? Like, there is some finite amount of human understanding that you can force into a cognitive system that is your brain. Otherwise, you just have to ignore other things, right? But so what's interesting is we broadened the sphere of communication so much that what you could possibly know is now essentially infinite. Like, you could know anything you wanted to know about anything. And so the first thing we did is increase access to all of that knowledge. And now we're having a problem where it's accessible, but it's not usable. And
There's
so,
too much of it. Yeah.
Right. And so now it's sort of a funny question, because like, do you teach kids to, like, are they, like, we should ask friends of ours that are teachers, but are they there like they did to us with calculators, saying, you can't use Google though, because Google won't be around, when you need it? Or are they just saying, yeah, Google that shit up. Get real specific.
Well, there's a middle ground on that one, which is just having the respect of the child to explain to them why you don't want them to use the calculator in that moment.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Which is one of those things where I'm like, when I think about the possibility of having children, and I'm just like, how do it relates to the profanity question.
You just can't have that kind of patience all the time.
Which is just like, well, on one hand, yeah, you can't.
Sometimes you just have to say, fuck you, don't use your calculator, you little jerk.
Like, I feel like this is maybe a good place to kind of start wrapping it up, because we're back to that sort of Zengineering thing, right? Like, what we were chasing all of first season, whether we knew it or not, was this interconnectedness, right? And by connecting everything, you've connected the knowledge of the whole system. And now we don't know what to do with it. And so where we are, what we have caught up to today in terms of what we would consider to be AI is a system that, like we were just describing with Siri, can do a certain piece of interpreting in order to make it easier to access all of this knowledge. But like, you wouldn't say that it understands the knowledge.
Yeah, it's interesting because we touched on this for sure as we were talking. Siri's definitely doing some really crazy stuff like the voice recognition, but that's not actually its purpose. Like, Siri doesn't exist to recognize my voice. We just had to solve that to make it useful. So you can almost disregard that at the moment. We can talk about that later in the next episodes here on this, but the function that she's trying to serve, like answering questions and basically that, right? Like answering questions, doing things for you. She's kind of doing, but she's also, like you said, really just accessing data for you. She's kind of just she's a librarian, but without any suggestions. She doesn't say, is this you wanted this topic, here's some others that are related. She's just like, here's kind of the thing I pulled up out of a file somewhere.
Here's some other things that I can kind of, that I think are related, but just not really based on an understanding. It's more based on like this keyword analysis. Like, it's still in the sense of a comparison to a real librarian. It's just sort of a blunt tool.
Right.
And it's this tool that we're like fiercely building and improving because humans we have this need to solve this problem. And the first wave was connect everything, because everything's got to be connected, right? I mean, it's got to be connected. That's what I think gets us back to that place of like, to get us to that moral, the mission that we're chasing, right? Which is like, how do you deal with the future that technology is bringing around? I think what you have to understand is that piece where like, why did we want everything connected? We just did. We're like, it has to happen.
We didn't even necessarily say it has to happen. A lot of people said these things serve no purpose. There is no use for a computer in your home. Only dorks were networking their computers. Right. And people were losers for hanging out and playing with their computer. And now the entire world's population stares at their phone all day long. So like, there's clearly something really magical going on with this stuff. I was listening to a TED Radio Hour earlier with a lady who's talk about granularity. She's a cyborg anthropologist. And so she studies the concept of this progression as we change from being human into this other thing. And she was talking about a lot of the same stuff we were just talking about, but she called phones, like she called them magic portals. She's like, I just talk about them. They're magic portals into another time. I mean, you're crossing time zones. You're hearing messages from people that they left weeks ago. They're time portals. They're information portals. They're geographic portals. I mean, the internet and this connectivity is, we're trivializing some of this stuff and saying like Siri sucks at what she does, but it's freaking mind blowing that she even does the things that she does now.
But then what she's doing is really just trying to help us. Like, she's a tool for trying to negotiate what we accidentally manifest by connecting everything, right? And there's no reason to think that we're not going to keep chasing that tool. So I think to pimp the next part, what we're going to get into is what is really cool that's happened that relates to that quantum computing episode we talked about before is, and I think we talked about it some in an episode where we were talking about machines playing Go, the game Go.
Yeah, we've touched on like actual like modern kind of machine learning topics a little bit. So the
next chunk that I want to get into in the next episode, I think, is what's happened recently that makes this such a sincere conversation. Because it still feels like a giant leap between Siri and Alexa and this world where it's like, this thing exists that you can't even get your head around, and Terminators and super intelligence and the Borg, and like it still feels really far apart. So I think when we say that it's coming, you need to start figuring out what your meditation practice is going to be for when the singularity happens, because it's like, you know what I'm saying? It's going to become this deeply philosophical conversation, and no one is ready for it.
By the nature in which podcasts are delivered through smartphones and computers, there is definitely no one listening to this podcast who doesn't already appreciate the fact that we are absolutely flooded and overwhelmed by digital devices that are reaching out to us to interact with them. They are pinging us constantly and ringing and dinging and pushing information to us. They are calling our names constantly. Like, the floodgates have opened, and it's important that we recognize it as such and pay attention to it. And I say this deliberately with a lot of energy here and emphasis. I'm trying not to pass judgment on it, but I'm excited, but I'm also terrified.
Think it matters to pass judgment because it's happening. This is what the first season was about for me, which is it's happening. To try to say it shouldn't happen, it's just ignorant. I think, because as much as we can talk about the morality of the implications of artificial intelligence and blah, 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 like North Korea still exists. It's going to be an arms race to this kind of stuff because people think it's important. You can't just sit down and be like, well, all the smart people think this. This progression across technology and communication and all of that. I'm gesticulating wildly right now and no one can see it. And that just kind of bummed me out.
I can see it, buddy.
But do you see what I'm saying? Like, I don't mean to be hostile about North Korea or stupid people, right? But I mean, there are a lot of entities chasing this same stuff because they are driven by the same weird natural need to chase this technology. And they're not, it doesn't matter that Elon Musk thinks it's a bad idea.
Yeah, the genie has escaped.
Right. Exactly. It's a Pandora's box problem.
The genie escaped as soon as we invented video games. And that's a great place to end, I think, because that's actually I think a really cool comment. Like, this is all driven by video games and boobs.
Come back for part 2, which may or may not be the next one after this one. Probably won't be because of our guest schedule. But stick around, follow us on social media, Zengineering Pod, and we'll be back with number 2 to talk about what exactly the floodgates are and to try to help you understand like what changed in the last few years that's only going to accelerate all of this madness.
Oh, it's going to be great. And don't forget to like us on things like Facebook and iTunes and stars and whatever. But most importantly, if you've been enjoying our podcast, pass it along to some friends that listen to podcasts too, because that's really how podcasts get shared. and how information gets shared.
Just keep that. Let's just make that knowledge hole deeper.
Sharing is caring. Dig a deep knowledge hole.
Oh, good work, people. Good work, Brian. Thanks for hanging out. I'm Adam.
Brian. Off to outer space we go.
They don't know what I know. They don't know like I know.
But like, is it gonna order the right toilet paper? Probably not. Suck my dick, Alexa.